back with the, if you want to give and take, we'll create a give and take, but you're going to get tired of it just like we're tired of it, right? Yeah, exactly. All right. Hot potato. Deborah.
Just one sec. I'm answering my client who's leaving the island today. So.
Hot potato. Yes. The other party tries to pass a problem on to you. For example, the co-op agent tries to pass all closing costs to your client because their client can't afford them.
That happens. What do we do with a hot potato? What did we do with it when we were playing hot potato when we were kids?
Throw it back.
Throw it back. Yeah, test the validity. Absolutely. Throw it back. Test the validity. Find out if the problem is real. Has the party with the problem exhausted every possible solution?
Now, does their lender have a fiduciary responsibility to their client? Can you call their lender and say, is this for real? Or are they giving more?
You could, but whether or not they, I mean, I can't afford them is to me, that doesn't answer the question. I mean, there's too many variables for that to be a truth statement or a non-truth statement, right? I can't afford them. Okay, have you asked all your relatives? Right, like nobody can answer that question. Like, find the money somewhere. Why did you get into a contract if you couldn't afford this? Are we done? Is this a dead deal? Now, of course, you're talking to your client and finding out where they stand on your response, right? You're only giving these counter tactics as suggestions. This is what I suggest we do, right? They're trying to have us pay for it. How do we make this work? All right, make sense? Yeah. Okay, you get the long one, Deborah.
Okay. Two people working together, for example, a husband and wife, will take on opposing roles. One appears friendly and considerate while the other behaves in a difficult or aggressive manner. Think of the typical car salesman. Good guy who says his manager, bad guy, won't let him reduce the price any further.
Yeah. And then my first question is, can I talk to that manager?
Yeah.
No, then I'm not buying a car here. Yeah, that happens often. Okay, so what do we do when that happens?
Talk to the aggressive guy.
There you go.
Try to get him to calm down.
There you go.
You just suggest that why don't you guys come to one common understanding? You guys talk it out and let me know.
There you go.
You don't really, like, do you have to broker these kinds of things?
Sometimes. So call them on their game. You can even say, come on, you're not going to play good guy, bad guy, are you?
Mm-hmm.
If it continues, then attribute what the bad guy says to the good guy.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, like in the car sales scenario, that's not your manager, that's you. Own it. And then let's talk about it and figure out if we can make this work, right? This likely will diffuse the tactic because you now have two bad guys. You're not generally going to work with two different people, but this will happen sometimes when you're dealing with your sellers. Like you may have one who's like what I call the hard ass and then the softie, right? Like that's how my husband and I are. Like I'm the hard one, right? He's just like, yeah, what's the cost? Here you go. It's like, you can negotiate stuff like that. Nah, I just rather pay it, right? That's not me. I'm the questioner. I'm the one who's like, okay. So if you're in a scenario where there's your sellers, here's what I would actually recommend. Be careful who you're talking to and having the relationship with. Because if you're dealing with, like I'm a D and C, right? But my D shows up pretty strong when I'm in negotiation phase. My husband's S, right? So people want to talk to him. But if you negotiate with my husband and you get a deal done with my husband, your deal's not done. You need to deal with me. And he'll straight up tell you, you need to deal with my wife.
Yeah.
Like I had contractors come over the house and they're like talking to my husband and then I'll ask a question and then they'll keep talking to him and I'm like, dude, you're not going to get hired because you're talking to him. And he's like, you need to talk to her. I don't know any of these terms. And it's kind of funny because it's assumed and I'm just like, no other way to tick me off than treat me like I don't know what you're talking about because I'm a female, right? Like, you're out my door because you will not be allowed in my house again. Like, it riles me up, But, so you got to talk to the person that's negotiating with you because if you don't address that person because the other person's easier to deal with, you are going to have a deal in the end.
Okay.
Does that make sense? You can tell who's sort of in charge. Now your C's are more like the engineer guy, right? Like he just wants info. Like just make sure you give him the stats, but he's not gonna interact with you as much. You're gonna have to deal with the wife on that one, or the other way around if it's the other way around, right? Because then C's don't marry C's. Engineers don't marry engineers. Because then you have two hermits, right? Nobody would talk to anybody ever. So you need that S personality in the house, right? To balance it out. So then you want to have that S, but you got to be careful and make sure you're dealing with the person who's the decision maker. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Moving on. All right, so we are on page 20. All right, acknowledge and affirm the common ground. So we are, position. So, sorry, the previous page, position. Position is moving both parties closer to each other until you have full agreement. So, position. Acknowledge and affirm the common ground, where the buyer and seller are in agreement and are at the same position. Then identify which positions may be easily adjusted and which are set in stone. So get clear. Ask what and how questions to better understand the other party's value and why certain things are important to them. That's back to what we were talking about. For example, say you represent a seller who wants to close in 30 days. If a buyer wants to close within 60 days, ask your client, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you are requesting a 30-day closing. What is important about closing in 30 days? Like, make sure you know why, right? You want to know the why behind. We don't generally want to say why. It's a little, some personalities will really take that word as an aggressive word. Mm-hmm. Like, why? Why?
Yeah.
Why do you want to do that?
Yeah.
Versus what about that is important to you,
As
right?
as a challenge.
Yes, why can be considered a challenge, so you need to be careful. Even though you're asking a why question, you don't want to say, well, why do you want to do that? Say, what about that is important to you? It just is better for interaction. So if your client becomes defensive, you would explain, my goal is to let the buyer know why this point is important to you. So yeah, I would always ask, and I don't think anybody would be defensive if you say, you're requesting a 30-day closing. What is important about closing in 30 days? By then, I probably know anyway, because I've asked them questions. I know their scenario. At least I should if I'm doing my job. All right. Understanding what is important to the other party allows you to prioritize and address their issue in order of importance. So this is, you've got let's say you're representing the seller, you've got the offer in your hand. You're seeing a few things that your seller's probably not going to like. You can talk to your seller, say, I'm seeing a couple things. And you can have a conversation with the other side. Hey, are these really important points to you? And if so, why? Right? So this is the communication of these may be sticky points. Because a lot of times that buyer's agent didn't call you first to ask you what kind of closing you needed, right? They weren't the proactive person. That's an important piece. So you want to have that conversation. Like, you may find out that your seller's number, I will say, okay, of these 3 things that we don't like, what's the number one thing? If we could only get one of those, what would be? And they would tell me. And then I'll go to the other side and I'll ask them the same thing. What's the highest priority of these 3 things? And they may be 2 totally different things. Great, we'll give you that, but we're going to ask for this. Because my buyer needs it or my seller needs it, right? We're not trying to be a pain. We want to come to an agreement. So just communicate. Does that make sense? Yeah, awesome. Okay. Positioning is a process and sometimes requires you to come back to the negotiating table more than once. Sometimes several counter offers will be necessary to negotiate an acceptance. So you don't want to take the verbal too far, right? You want to actually get things in writing like we were talking about before. Because it can get a little foggy if you have too many things you're working on. So hit a couple things, do the counter, and then see if you can come together. And it may take a couple counters before you figure it out, but you'll get there. The point is we're trying to get there, right? Win-win. It's number 1.
Marion was saying it sometimes takes 4. You can go back and forth 4 times. Do you think that's excessive?
It could. Yeah, it just depends. Know when to walk away. So sometimes the other side may refuse to give your client the win they need despite your efforts. Knowing when and how to walk away can not only save your client from a win-lose deal, but it can sometimes jolt an unreasonable party into a concession for fear of losing the deal. The key is to walk away without burning bridges. So that's exactly the scenario I had earlier this year. I said, look, we can still negotiate, but my client's not budging, right? So he's willing to walk away. We still want to make the deal work. Can we make the deal work? Right? It works sometimes. It's that whole walk out of the dealership, and then they'll call you and go, okay, we'll give you that price, right?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. You guys are gonna play for a few minutes. So you've got a scenario here. So I'm gonna have you guys do it as 3. So, and you're gonna do it, we'll do it through twice. So in fact, we're gonna do 2 different positionings. So I'll just have you guys, one will just be observing while the other 2 are working it. So you're gonna have in the first one, we need a buyer's agent and a listing agent. So,
I'll watch the first time.
why don't you do
We're gonna
buyers?
do buyer because we're
Okay,
playing.
and you'll do the listing agent, and you can watch the first time dinner.
Buyer's agent.
And then you'll get to choose on the second one what you wanna be.
Okay.
And then we will actually have you and Erin do. But you get to be what you want, so. Okay, so read the scenario. Use what you've learned so far in the session. Take a couple minutes to prepare for the negotiations. And then we're going to practice. I want to hear, so take a minute to prep. And then when I come back,